All right, Pops, I'm calling an impromptu meeting because I need your help. So I
Sure.
got my program, you know a little bit about my business. I run a continuing education program for paramedics and nurses and firefighters, EMTs. And we're about 2 years into it right now. And pretty much everything we've been doing has been social media driven as far as marketing goes.
Hmm.
And we haven't really had like a sales force, I guess, as you would say, somebody going out and closing sales. It's a website. We drive traffic to that website by doing podcasts and blogs and free content. And then that's how we kind of get people into our ecosystem. And then we have a series of email sequences, but everything's really automated. I'm not calling people up and saying, this is why you should choose our program over someone else's. And so, you've been in sales, my whole life. And I started thinking about, well, would it make sense to hire a salesperson to do this stuff? Or is this something that, I can learn? And then you just kind of went off from like the corporate side and now you're doing the entrepreneur side and you just created and you're in the process of creating a whole class on closing and on sales. And so I thought, man, I just wonder what is like the merit behind still having sales in a sales force? Because the I guess the I don't know if I'm a millennial, but I don't know. I think I'm a millennial. Generation X says, is this an antiquated thought process that we actually need people out there making phone calls? And so that's what I wanted to pick your brain a little bit with today is whether that sales force is actually needed, or can I just spend that money on Facebook marketing and spend that money on all the other things that seem to drive people into our ecosystem. So I guess my first question for you, and it's probably a little bit to unpack, but do you think that technology is advancing so much so that we will see the salesman or the saleswoman or the salesperson start to decline and those jobs start to fall off?
I think, first of all, I want to back up and say you're asking, as a new business and a startup, you're asking yourself and your partner, your conversations are spot on. And this was something that, being in sales over 30 years, my whole career, it didn't matter. I mean, technology has accelerated things to the point, but even years ago, you always had to validate your approach because things were always changing. It's just changing faster now. So, what I mean by that is, you're taking a lot of the things and identifying the gaps in your company, and you're taking the technology as far as you can. So, the good news is you've done a lot of the pre work. And that's the thing that I really try to get companies to do is to validate their approach. Are they optimizing technology and taking it as far as you can? Because what's going to happen is you're going to see a gap. And this goes to your ideal type of client and your customer. So you're going to look at your business and you're now a year into it, a couple of years into it, and you're going to start looking at data and say, who is our ideal client? Who's our focal customer that we make the most money on and that we can retain? And that is where you're starting to narrow down your sights on where you would want a salesperson. Because to answer your question directly, there is a certain element of the salesperson, I guess, or the sales profile that won't exist anymore. And that is that sort of nurturer, the one that was, always there to give the pricing, and you could always get them on the phone. And all these things have been automated. That doesn't deliver value anymore. Before systems and automations, that was viewed as great customer support, very customer focused. But now that's all automated. So there's no value in that. You can't afford to have salespeople do that. Where you start to understand that client, the reason that's so important is because now, as your customer, you start to sift and sort through your clientele, and you start to see that some of these bigger enterprises, they are the ones that they spend more with you. The profits are better. You're able to keep them longer. So now you're going to have this subset of very, very focused customers, and that's where you're going to focus your sales efforts. So you may not have thought about it this way, but you and Sam are your salespeople. So as you start to grow and you
Yeah.
get to a point where you've got to run your company and you've got to be the strategic visionary and keep developing content and make sure that your technology is continued to be optimized, you're going to have a salesperson if you're going to take your company to the next role, or salespeople that are going to work on those larger enterprises. And what they're going to do is they're going to be very focused on disrupting because in your competition's hands today. So you might identify other types of customers that are in your space, and you're going to align those. And maybe you have a top 20 or top 25 group of subset of enterprises that you say strategically, we need to be doing business with these top 25 enterprises. And for that, Sam and I have been sort of chipping away at it, but we need somebody that can focus 110% on that. So, what that's going to do, the good news for you is that individual is going to be highly accountable. So, with all this technology that has come, accountability has become, it's so transparent. It was kind of hard to tell in the past how profitable was a salesman. Are they just taking care of our already existing clientele? Are we getting this through our sort of intangible marketing and branding? But now you will have very, very high level of transparency, so that salesperson has to be much more focused and results oriented than in the past. So that's the big change, the big shift, I would say.
All right. All right. So if I'm understanding you right, and tell me if this is an accurate, um, I don't know, an accurate recall of what you just said, that you should automate everything that you can. So
Mm-hmm.
automate maybe the lead generation aspect, the marketing aspect, getting people into your ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, people still want to buy from people.
Yeah, exactly. Now you do want that technology. The first thing is, yes, get the technology as far as you can, because you won't be able to afford to have somebody do that part if you can automate it. The economics just won't work for you. So you want to have these salespeople very, very focused on a very specific customer subset. So it's all about they're either continuing to move clients over the goal line because they're already in your marketing process and funnels, or they're out there disrupting, trying to penetrate new customers, new clientele. That's the narrow. I call it sort of the narrow or the short game that the salesperson is going to play. They're not going to be in that, hey, I go fishing, you go fishing. Let's talk football and what happened over the weekend with already existing customers, and growing existing and nurturing existing customers is going to be less of the future for the salesperson, because systems and teams will take care of that. Support teams, retention teams, all the things that are behind your marketing. Salespeople will be in this very narrow window of the bottom end of the funnel of either disrupting to sell, or to take over the goal line, medium or larger enterprises that your marketing has taken as far as it can.
And I want to put a pin in that disrupting, because I want to come back to that. But I want to say first, it's interesting because I called you the other day and I was telling you some of my thoughts. And I think I said something along the lines of, tell me if you think this is an accurate statement. The best products in the world don't need a salesman. And you were like, no, I don't think that's accurate at all. And so I went home and I started, I actually brought up a bunch of like evidence. I started Googling, is sales dead? And it's so funny because I found articles back from like 1930 when the telephone started becoming more of a thing. And then even longer back, like when they started making railroads and they were turning farms into cities now. And anytime there was a huge advancement in technology, some wise guy comes out with an article saying that sales are dead and that sales are going to die. And they actually found that the sales jobs increased. And it was interesting to see because, I'm thinking this is some novel idea that I have, that sales is dead and social media marketing is where everything is at. But I'm just repeating history, because if I go back and I look, anytime there's been a big advancement and they go, oh, now we don't have to go door to door. We can call people. That's going to cut sales jobs down, because now I can call a lot more people than I can drive out and knock on their door. Anytime there's been a huge advancement in technology, there's been this thought process that it's going to kill off sales jobs. And all it ends up doing is just generating more leads and then more space for that salesman. And I should say more space because it is a very narrow space that you said that they're closing and that they're tying that human touch before somebody actually agrees to go through with the purchase. And that's interesting to me because I see the same exact thing. So I have people who call me and they say, "Hey, I'm sitting here looking at your online paramedic refresher course and it looks really good. And I guess honestly, I just wanted to make sure this is legit and talk to a person." And I that's happened more times than I can afford to ignore. That somebody said, "I just wanted to make sure this is a legit," and I was talking to an actual person. And I'm like, "Yeah, it's me. I work as a full-time flight paramedic, and this is something me and my buddy put together to try to improve the quality of education out there. And oh well, I was a paramedic and I did this and this and this, and I'm a year out from retirement, and it does lead to a little bit of banter and a little bit of a conversation. But I mean, I see them they get on and they buy it right away after that. And so adding that human touch to the end of an automated process appears to be like the cherry on top.
Yeah.
And so what I am looking at now is, okay, I can't always be that person. We're generating, 70 to 100 leads a day that are coming into our system just through our ads. And so they're populating in, and if I have to talk to all of them on the phone about their history and how long they've been in EMS and kind of shoot the crap for a little bit, that's going to tie up a lot of my time. And so I need to put somebody in that position that can do that. Now, there's also a branch of people that will go through my entire funnel and buy the course no matter what. Like they don't care about talking to somebody. And I don't care if I don't know if they don't care, but they're just, "Hey, I got to get this done." They get on, they buy it. And that's what's interesting to me is that there's these two sets of people. There's the one that want to tie a human emotion to a sale before they'll purchase it. And then there's the branch that is just automated. And, I don't even see John Smith. He goes through the course, he takes everything and he's out the other side and he renews and stuff. And so trying to figure out, the best way to spend our money, our capital that we have, and how to allocate that has been interesting because I want to actually be able to see that the sales that are coming in are the ones that this person that we hire for sales is actually closing, and that there's a delineation between those and then the ones we would have had anyway.
So what's really interesting about your thought process is that I remember having this similar conversation, and this is a conversation that will always go on. And I remember back in the 90s when CRMs became big. Actually, they became big. They started entering into like the corporate world in like the late 80s, but in the early to mid 90s, CRMs were becoming a really big item because you could really gather a lot of data about your customers. You could sift and sort through your customer types, and that was the beginning of that process. And you had salespeople that push back that technology. "Oh my gosh, this is going to replace us. This is going to replace us." And then you had other salespeople. This is really where I saw a parting of the waters, if you will, of sales profiles, because you had this other group of salespeople that couldn't get enough of it. And you would find that they were the top performers, and you would, it was something I really liked. I liked it because it gave me acceleration. It allowed me to reach a lot more people quicker, to understand the data and the customer types. And the ones that didn't like it were the ones that, one, they didn't like change, which that was never going to go away, especially in sales with technology. And two, they didn't like the accountability. And I think they feared exposure is what I started as a sales manager. I started to think, I thought of myself, I thought, "Hey, I'm proud to let people know how many calls a day I can make, and they can see my data," because I wanted to stack myself up against, the rest of the company. So that was where it first started, but it didn't end there. As you went into the early 2000s, the sophistication, the technology changed. The biggest change that I saw was in 2007 and 8 when we went into the Great Recession. That that subset of sales profile, an element of them died off. They either evolved or they went and did something different because accountability became, that's where the rubber hit the road and you had to sell to survive. And recessions have a tendency to do that, to pair off the dead wood, as I would call it. I don't know if that's a good example or not, but so as technology grows, the good like I say, the good news about technology is all it does is continue to sift and sort your types of customers. So it doesn't eliminate the salesperson. It allows you, as a CEO of a company, it allows you the ability to weaponize your sales force with a laser focus, almost a sniper focus versus a shotgun approach. So you can take the type of sales profile that can disrupt, that can challenge and change and do all the things they need to do, and you can put them on the right types of customers. So you made the comment, I have these people that are calling in and they're asking me, how long you've been a paramedic, and they want to make a connection with you. And what you'll find is you'll further delineate those, and there'll be some of those that you would want that salesperson to close because the opportunity and the ticket's big enough. And there are some of those that, because they're not your focal customer, they're just going to have to go through your marketing process. And some of those, because they're not your ideal client. Remember, your ideal client is the one you make the most profit money on and the one you can retain long term. Some of those will come in, some of those won't. And you'll make a conscious, intentional decision on which ones that will be, so that your sales force can be focused on your biggest opportunities to grow your company.
That's really interesting about the recession and the advancing in technology starting to weed out maybe some of the people that I don't want to say we're riding the coattails of other salesmen and just going out and not really quantitating or quantitating what they were doing out in the field. And you call and you have a cup of coffee with somebody and you say, "Yeah, I'm just going to make a couple calls today." But what are you actually doing? And it reminds me of in emergency medical services, you'll see some of the highest performing systems, some of the these helicopter programs, and I like to think that the one I work at, LifeLink 3 up here in Minneapolis, they're very into tracking everything. What was the temperature of the patient when you picked them up? What was the temperature when you dropped them off? What is our first pass intubation success rate? What is the blood pressure 10 minutes after you perform an intubation? Your surgical area. There's all these parameters, and they call it gamut metrics. And there's all these metrics that you have to meet. And the people that are on top of their game, they like that because they like to see what their numbers are. Where people who maybe EMS is kind of an afterthought, they go in, they clock in or whatever. And I don't really see much of those in the helicopter EMS side of it, but I definitely did when I was working ground. People who just clocked in and did their stuff and went home, they don't like that because now you're telling them, hey, it took you 3 times to intubate this patient. Their pulse ox drop below this. And it starts to show some of the holes in the bucket of a system. And so learning how to measure that stuff and to embrace technology, because it does measure that stuff, is really interesting. And so I'm going to go back to you said disruption, and I feel like I've heard that a lot. Like that, I don't want to say it's a buzzword, but it kind of is a buzzword right now.
Sure. Yeah,
it's kind of like culture and disruption. And so when I think of disruption, I think of something that catches somebody off guard, and it's something that breaks, I don't want to say a social norm, but it breaks a norm, an expected pattern. And it makes you go, wait, you're triangle, square, triangle, square, triangle, square, circle. And it disrupts the pattern. Yeah. And so what does that look like? So when you're talking to someone on the phone, or you're making, maybe, let's say somebody calls me up and they say, hey, I wanted to tie a person to the product. Is that the time for me to be disruptive? And if it is, what does that sound like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because disrupting it can be positive, it can be negative. But what I mean by disrupting is it is breaking the thought process. So when there's 2 ways people connect with clients. One way is they're agreeable to things, and there's always that I'm like you, you're like me, which is a part of connecting, but they take the easy route. They listen to what types of things you see what they like, and oh, I like that too. I see you got a guitar there, so I like, hey, I play guitar. That type of thing will connect. But the funny thing, and the reason I mentioned the Great Recession, is what happened. People don't have time for that anymore. Everybody's more accountable, and everybody's under the gun, so there isn't that time for that type of conversation. So the way that I teach to connect is that you come in with a very intelligent a challenge. So it takes you doing a little more homework. Like, for example, I gave you some thoughts of where I think your sales force should go. You challenged me as to, hey, is a salesperson even viable anymore? I think I might be able to do it all with marketing. And I come right back at you and I challenge you. And I tell you, if I can see your company, I can show you where you can make more money and more profits and grow your client base and the right types of clients if you let me look at your company. And I'll challenge you, Tyler. And in your mind, and the data shows this, and this is, back in that Great Recession, the challenging type of sales profile was very successful, was more successful because they were challenging a status quo in a very intelligent way. And that's knowing how your client makes money, how they make money or save money. So I believe that you gotta, when I talk about disrupting, what's happening is because technology has taken a customer so far down the sales process or the sales funnel, whatever you want to call it, down to the intent and the decision making, the final part of the buy cycle, they've already got their mindset pre-framed and they think they know what they want. That's a good thing if they're coming through your funnel. But again, if that salesperson is going to grow your company, they're intercepting clients because of your marketing in your competition's funnel, but they're very deep into that funnel. So they've got to be able to disrupt that pattern and say, wait a minute, stop. Maybe there's something better. And that's what I mean by challenging, or that's what I mean by disrupting, is that you would be you're coming through that, everybody's doing such great marketing and that intent to buy is there. And then at the last moment, your salesperson intercepts that because of your marketing, and they got to be able to stop, change, break, hold it. Let me give you this new thought of something that you might be missing. So that's what I mean by disrupting, and it is a buzzword because it's the proper word that a lot of people don't understand what it means. They just hear it and they think, "Wow, that sounds pretty tough. That sounds pretty, that sounds like something I want to throw into my repertoire because like a sales warrior."
Yeah.
But how do you use it? Using it is very strategic. And that's the type of profile that will survive. But it's also the ones that can't do that can't disrupt. That is that element of sales profile that will die.
So tell me if this is an example. Oh, I'm sorry, but tell me if this is an example of disrupting. So our learning management system is a library of content for all levels of providers. So, and people are listening to this who aren't in EMS. You have first responders, which is like a very minimal schooling is involved. You know how to put oxygen on people, bandage them, hold pressure on wounds, blah, blah, blah. And then you got EMT, and then you got advanced EMT. And the difference is like you're able to start an IV and give a few drugs. And then at the top, you have paramedic, and that's where you have all these drugs and cardiac drugs, and you can do surgical airwaves. And then there's critical care paramedic, and then you can take advanced certifications like flight paramedic and get board certified in those. And so typically what's happened is if you're an EMT, you sign up for a course and you're exposed only to EMT content. So they don't teach you all the other stuff. They just teach you the stuff that is in your wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. And we said we think that's dumb because a lot of EMTs are working alongside a paramedic. A normal configuration that you'll see in the United States is a paramedic and an EMT working together. And so we said, why are we delineating that? It's like, I think of like churches where the adults go out here and the kids go over here, and everybody's kind of in their own silos, and they're only taught to a certain ceiling depending on their origin or what their background is, or what they're allowed to know. And so when people call us, they say, hey, I don't see a course for EMTs separated from the one from paramedics. And we say, yeah, it's because our philosophy is that if you can teach something really well, then anybody can understand it. And it's a scope of practice, not a scope of knowledge. So we don't put ceilings on it, on the knowledge limit. If a EMT wants to go on and do all of his stuff, he can. But if he wants to take a class on mechanical ventilators, they can. And they're like, wow, okay, that's different. I've never heard of that before. And so I feel like that is a disruption to like their normal pattern of what they would have predicted. Or when they find out, that it's a subscription service or whatever. There's certain things that like break what they expected, and break the norm of how this product has typically been offered in the past. And so that's how I was wrapping my head around like the disruption process. Now I see Ross, he'll send out emails and it'll have some crazy subject line. And, I sold everything and I'm moving into a camper, and you're like, what the heck is this? And you click on it and Ross goes into like a bunch of stuff about what he's doing. And so I look at that and I'm like, well, that's pretty disruptive as well. And Ross was telling me that people like the disruption process because there's two parts of it. There's a part where you're like, what is this? And then there's the part where you tie it together. And when you have the disruption, the what is this? You get a little bit of an adrenaline response. And then you have a serotonin response when you put the pieces together of that. And so I've heard different versions of what disruption is. And so I was trying to just put the pieces together in my own head of what that looks like.
Yeah, so that's those are two really good examples. When you look at like the human element of disruption, I look at it like you gave the example of Ross taking it to an extreme. And humans anchor in on sort of a even. We like things that are predictable, right? So we like things that we fall into patterns. And in sales and marketing, when you can break a pattern, if you take it to an extreme, you get a lot of you cast a broad net, because not everybody's going to drop everything and become a full-time RVer. But it does make people think, well, I can't do that, but maybe I could start RVing on the weekends, because that does seem like something I just never really explored. So it just blows up your mind, and it opens it up. It sort of cracks the seal of your mind to think bigger and to think that, wow, I'm missing this whole other element of something, that maybe I'm missing something. So it's that element of missing. So and what you're doing with it is a very logical approach too, because I think that they both have merit. I would say that they both have merit, and it really depends on who you're trying to draw in and what your audience looks like. Because in your particular instance, you're creating career paths for people. That's a very natural progression to go from an EMT to a paramedic. And what you really ultimately end up doing, if you were an employer of those individuals, you would see a clear separation of the wheat and the weeds. In other words, those that are ambitious and those that aren't. The ones that have ambition, that are going to continue to progress in a like a linear career, traditional career path, you're going to see them reaching out and starting to take some of those paramedic courses for knowledge, because they envision themselves being there. And the ones that are just happy being that EMT for life, they're just going to hang around in that basic entry level. So as an employer, I would structure it very much like you do, so that you can always see who's reaching for the next level, and you're going to get your premium, your cream of the crop employees out of there. It's no different in sales. We would add responsibility. We had entry level, medium, and senior type positions, and you would always see the ones that are always trying to knock on the door, and so it does give you the ability to separate out, who are the performers and who are not. So that's my two different examples.
Ideal customer.
Yeah. But they're very different,
right? So sorry, I went off.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
sorry.
They are. They're different, but same concept. And sorry, I went off on a little side tangent with the disruption, but that's just because I've heard that word, and I just wanted to pick your brain and see what your definition was. Mm-hmm. So coming back to like the Salesforce idea, and whether that's something that I should spend money on right now, and whether I'm ready for that, then I think that's probably a question in a lot of people's minds when they're starting up a business is, at what point do I feel like I can afford to do this? And at what point is this a wise decision? And should sales be my first full-time employee that I bring on? Or should, and Sam and I, we were like, should we hire an animator? Because so much of our stuff is digital, or should we hire somebody to do marketing for us? And I do feel like sales is a good place to start, but how do you acid test whether you're ready or not to pull the trigger on hiring someone for sales?
Great question. And that I would answer that differently depending on the size, where the company is in its maturity. So when you and Sam were first starting off, you had your ideal client was a little different. You were just trying to get revenue, just trying to start to get revenue. Now you're starting to sift and sort through the types of customers. And when you have it to the point, because all roads will lead through revenue. I mean, nothing happens without a sale. So animators, you can't afford them. You can't afford any of those other positions without sales. So the question you have to ask yourselves, do we have the systems in place to obtain our ideal clients? And maybe these are now the largest enterprises that would be in your niche. The largest, maybe they're hospitals or 16 or 20 hospitals and, huge amount of seats in your programs. And do you have the systems that can support that? Because I've seen companies get out ahead of their skis in the sense that they'll hire a couple salespeople to go get the biggest elephants in the niche, and then they land one and they can't support them. They cannot take care of those clients because they don't have the systems and processes in place. So if the company is to that point where you're looking at this next layer of growth and where that growth is going to come from as a company, and you say, we've got the systems in place that we can take premium care of these clients, that's the time. So that it's really an understanding of validating your systems and processes and a reality check, because everybody thinks, oh yeah, we can handle that. Let's go get them and then we'll figure it out. That's not a good process for a company, because I've seen companies either go broke or I've seen them, one and done with these types of clients, and they have a high churn rate. And either one of those you can't really afford. They're super expensive, especially for a young company. So that's how I would look at it as you and Sam. Are we ready to take on the Goliaths in our niche? Because that's where your salesperson is going to make you the most money. That's what's going to make them affordable at the end of the day. It's not the 1 and 2, station paramedic type of company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. When you said get ahead of your skis, I was just imagining that somebody coming down a hill, getting a little bit ahead of their skis, rolling down a hill. That's what it feels like sometimes too.
Yeah. But it is. You got to validate that, right? You got to really give yourself an honest assessment of where your company is. And that's a hard thing for companies to do. And sometimes an outside set of eyes can help with that.
When we, so our actual first person we hired was an accountant, and we thought that was pretty important. Yeah. Yeah. It was nice to get tax forms and just to hit forward and send it off. And I remember early on, I think it was you or Ross said a good accountant will pay for themselves.
Yeah.
And I thought that makes a lot of sense. And I would hope that would be true with the salesman as well, that or salesperson, that they would pay for themselves because they're going to increase sales. So that's interesting, that aspect of it. Now, you just created, and you're in the process of creating a course right now. And I want to pick your brain a little bit about the course and what your intent is. Like, what if that was a vehicle? Where is that taking people, and where are they starting from, and where's it taking them?
Yeah, it really goes back to how our conversation started. It's the speed of technology, it's the use of, and actually, now going through this pandemic, it really erased a lot of generational issues with technology. So a lot of sales now are done remote, or at least they're initiated. So that's called outbound selling. And whether it's outbound selling, inbound selling, or it's face-to-face, there are still some common elements of it. But there are things that you lose in a remote sales type of situation. So what I end up doing in this course is I'm getting people's mindset where we are today. I'm bringing them to where we are today in technology, things like mirroring and things that you can't do on the phone traditionally. I can't see you, you can't see me unless we're Zooming. I can't read body language. But things like tonality, I can hear whether you're smiling. I can hear what your body's doing, because your body and your voice doesn't lie. So I'm very focused on some very, very deeply seated sales techniques that have worked over the generations, but now how they adapt into today's environment. So, like I was saying, you always validate your sales process, your organization, and this brings you up to where we are today, and where I believe will prepare the salesperson for the next 5 or 10 years, and that is operating in that narrow window. And there is going to be another weeding out of salespeople after we move through this period that we're in now, just like there was in 2008, where salespeople become more professionalized. So I believe, salesmanship is no different than being a medic, a paramedic, and that progression is that professionalization continues to occur. It was a little less formal, as we went through time, but it's becoming very formal now because of the technology that's forcing the accountability on the average salesperson. So the one that takes that understands this whole idea of customer centricity and sifting and sorting types of customers, and they find the way to make their value, to create the value. That's what I do with this course. Is we understand what you're looking at as a CEO of a company, and truly what makes money and what saves money, and how do we retain customers, and going after the right types of customers. And I give you an example. When I was in 1990, I was selling construction equipment, and we had Dodge books that gave us every construction project going on in our territory. And we would call on every job that was over $1 million. Well, in construction, those are small jobs if it was $1 million job site. And that was a goal, and it was sort of a badge of honor to say that you were able to call on every job $1 million and over. Today, we couldn't afford to do that. Today, that has changed significantly to maybe, let's say, I'm going to grab maybe $15 million on up, or $20 million. In some cases, we can't even afford to call on the job sites. Our distribution has to do it because we were B2B. So, that's where.
So you would actually go.
Go ahead.
You would actually go to a job site while they're working and try to sell them your equipment?
Yeah. We'd go out and we would look at. Yeah, we'd look at their process. It's antiquated. You can't afford to do it anymore. But we would look at their process. Yeah. But the mindset was still the same. The transaction type and disrupting was the same. We'd pull up on a job. We'd look at what type of equipment we were doing, and we would pull off a piece that would get it done faster and better. And so that part was.
You look at what they're using and just. Psh.
Yeah, and let me show you a faster, better way.
Look at their equipment.
Yep. But we couldn't do that anymore. Yeah, right. We couldn't do that. We can't do that anymore. So it's just,
remember
it's this
you get
journey
a sticker every time you. Remember how you get a sticker every time you knocked somebody else off a job site?
Yeah, that was that sort of badge of honor.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's what when you said badge of honor. I remember your truck had all these little stickers on the side of it, and I remember asking you, "What are those?" You're like, every time we kick somebody else off a job site and they take our equipment. And there was a ton of stickers on there. So obviously that tactic was working then. And it was, the corporation you worked for is a big corporation. It wasn't like they were just doing things to do them. Everything seemed like it had to have been pretty calculated, but it's just interesting now that technology advances, you can find easier ways of doing that.
But that goes back to, when we're talking about your company, your customer changes as your company grows. And you penetrate a certain niche of customers, and that customer needs to take on bigger customers to keep growing and feeding. It feeds on bigger and more. It doesn't stop, right? It's like a shark. The company has to keep moving. And so that became an antiquated process to where we had to go after bigger jobs. And then we couldn't call on the jobs like we used to. So then we had to, because we had more and more dealers, we had distribution. So then we trained our distribution to do what we did. And it's this evolution of a company that you have to always validate. You'll find that your company is never going to sit still. It's either going to go forward or it's going to go backwards. If you think it's staying the same, it's going backwards. So as long as you're always looking out at and validating your processes, that's what's going to drive you to the next level. Because my recommendation for you today might look different than if you come to me a year from now, or if you went back in time 12 months and you asked me the same question and I looked at the company, maybe it couldn't afford a salesperson. Maybe you and Sam were okay for that size at the time. But there's going to come a time, trust me, where you and Sam have to get out of that, just like you had to get an accountant. You had to get out of it, and you have to find somebody else so that you can keep your company growing and keeping it healthy and making sure that you're working on your business and not necessarily in the weeds of it. Not that you lose touch with your business. You never can do that. But if you
Yeah.
bear down on one side of your company too much, you'll lose a perspective of where you might have leaks in the company.
Yeah, and we've found that if we're putting too much into, I don't want to say too much into customer satisfaction because that's not, but if we're doing too many phone calls and walking people through resetting passwords and, your day-to-day monotonous stuff, we do notice that our content starts to come down. We're not able to put out those podcasts and blogs, and we do these speech to text or text to speech type podcasts, and we're always looking for new ways of innovating the way that education looks. And we can't dedicate bandwidth to that if we're taking that bandwidth and we're applying it to things like walking John and whoever through how to set up their account. And so that's why we've looked at things and said, all right, is this user error or is this design failure? And it goes right back to what you said with automating as much as you can and trying to get very intuitive design. So that way it diminishes that, because you could hire a salesperson, but in my mind I start thinking, well, it'd be better for me to hire a customer service representative right now to sit there on the phone with these people and to help them out, because that's where I see I'm spending a lot of my time is that, hey, I can't reset my password. Hey, where does this certificate go? How do I send this to the National Registry of Emergency Medical Technicians? And so we've gotten, I don't want to say we've perfected it, but we've gotten very good at looking at something and then tracking where it could go wrong. And all right, what if they do this? What if they click on this? And that's helped a lot. And I would rather spend money on a sales force, bringing more people in, and then just have really good design on the user side of it. And I have a digital product, and and soon you will too. And so that's the area that we've had to learn. That's been the biggest learning curve, is saying, okay, I could have 5 of my friends look at this and say, hey, it looks really good. I think it's ready to go live. But when you put 13,000 people through something, you find every little spot that something could go wrong. And then you got to try to perfect that. So I want to transition. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to wrap that point up, the one thing that I can't emphasize enough is I really do think it's important when you're looking at those phone calls and the quantity of calls as you grow, there's always opportunity costs. And this does have a sales point to it. But when you're looking at that, are those types of people that you're spending all that time with on the phones, is it detracting you from and slowing down your ability to grow with the types of customers that you're trying to get to? Because what'll happen is that you're going to have to make a choice. At first, when the company starts, you just throw all that marketing out there and everybody that can come in comes in and all that. And you'll always do an element of that. But I think it's time that you start to segment your customer base and you start to learn the behaviors of your customer base so that you know which ones you're spending the most time on. And you might find that you're spending the most time on the ones that are very fragmented, that you don't make much money on and that you don't retain very long. So in your business, you're going to want to say, you might say, all these calls, 75% of the calls we're taking and helping people with logins, they're only retaining for 60 days and they're gone. But the one that seems like our big clients, they don't need as much hand holding and we make a lot more money on them. And that's the direction we want to take the company, because ultimately you'll have that decision, that crossroad to make. And then and I think you're going to find that to be the case, is that the ones that suck the most time are onesies and twosies that you can't retain, or you don't retain long as retention goes. And then you start to get a very, very clear vision of your customer base. And then where would I put that salesperson? Because I see companies all the time say, hey, I think we should hire a salesperson. And that salesperson goes out and just calls on everybody. Big mistake, because that's too expensive. You would want to, like in your role, you would have very, very specific clients that you would want that individual, it's going to be a lot of them, might be 25 or 50, whatever it is, but you don't want them going chasing onesies and twosies because the metrics don't work, the numbers don't work. But you've got that in place. But you're going to have to, you'll come to that crossroad where you're going to want to understand where that time is spent so that you can really find the value of where the direction of the company is going. Does that make sense?
It's interesting you say that. Yeah, absolutely. It does. We had somebody call us, and sounded like an elderly person who didn't want to let their EMT license expire, and it hurt their back, and had been out of work, but they held this EMT card, their license, as something that was like their last little merit or whatever, and it didn't sound like they were going to be able to afford the course, right? So I said, you know what, I'm gonna give you the course for free because I appreciate your service and what you've done while you were working, and I just felt, I don't know, it's just the sucker side of me. I'm like, I'm just gonna give it to you for free. So I give this older gentleman this course for free, and for 2 weeks straight, every single day, I have received a phone call. And those phone calls are walking through how to use a mouse on a computer, how to turn the computer on, how to log into the internet, how to sign into the course, how to process the CE. And I'm like, you know what? No good deed goes unpunished. But it's interesting because I'm sitting here thinking, all right, what is my ROI on this? And I hate to think of it like that because I want to help people out. But when you're spending that amount of time, even if somebody would have paid for the course, and our course is $160. I mean, it's not a very large ticket item, but even if somebody would have paid for the course, I got to look at that and go, man, I'm spending so much time. Just, what is my time worth? If I sit on the phone for an hour with somebody, I value my time. If I were to go speak somewhere for an hour, I wouldn't charge $160. It'd be a lot more than that. I charge them $1,000 to, $2,000 to go speak. So you start seeing these dollars and cents and time allotment, and then it goes down to like, okay, but I just wanted to help this dude out. And I think you got to have both. You can't be too analytical because there's got to be a human component. But at the end of the day, that's time that I could have been recording content and doing stuff. So just trying to find that balance is my biggest challenge.
So the reality is that you will have to make a choice as your company grows. And that time you spent there, a better way to look at it might be, what could I not do for my really, really good customer that's spending a lot of money with me? What was I not able to do because I had to do this? And, somebody that's spending a lot of money with you trusts you, you've garnered that trust with them, and that's somebody that you want to keep and that you have a deeper relationship with. And because you had to spend all the time on all these, those types of things that you just expressed, and maybe not to that extreme, but let's just say that bucket of customers that are just like them, like that individual, you're not able to do what you want to do for these customers that have a high expectation and that you sold a premium product to. And so it's a little shift of mindset of how you want to look, how you look at your business that way. So it's not what you wanted to do for that individual. It's what you're not doing for somebody that put trust in you and spent a lot of money with you.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I watched your course. I loved it. I thought it was very beneficial. It was interesting because I've never been in sales. You've been in sales. I always wanted to be a policeman or a firefighter or, a paramedic. And so to hear your years of experience and that side of it was very interesting to me. And, everybody wants to sit there and think that their parents are outdated and antiquated. But I was actually surprised. You were saying some things that I was like, man, that's a really good way of looking at that. And you had a breakdown, kind of like a worksheet where you try to figure out what makes your customers tick and how they make money and how to speak to them based off of their history and what you learned about them before you talk to them. And I thought that was really cool. Well, so anyone who's listening to this, I highly recommend that you go check it out. Now, Now, Pops, we all know you're not the most savvy with technology right now with recording stuff. But what was that process like, going in the room, closing the door, and talking to yourself for an hour with just a webcam and a microphone?
It was awkward, and I know that you and I had some conversations before this about it, and my style of speaking was always face to face, right? And that's a little old school. So speaking from a stage, meeting with customers, groups of customers, things like that. It's different. I mean, sitting right in front of this, I'm looking at you right now, so I'm not looking at this camera, because if I would, it would start to feel awkward again. But I'm looking at you and I'm talking to you like you're sitting across from me. And which is what you shared with me. You said, Dad, you got to just, relax a little, be yourself. And that was never me. I was always myself when I was on a stage, but it was awkward. And not only did I have to focus on the content, but I had to spend a lot of time learning how to, and I tortured you. I was that guy that was taking up your time, helping me learn how to use this. But, you're always super patient with me. And I am an embracer of technology, and I've learned so much since I've left my job. I did that intentionally, and I feel like if everybody could go through, you'd call it that, I'm 54 right now. If everybody could go through that process, because in my former corporate life, I was a director of sales, for the US, and things come at you fast. You're making decisions based on your past experience. There's not as much, there's not as much out there where you're having to every single day learn all this new stuff. And so, it makes me feel like I'm 20 years younger. I'm catching up. I'm catching on to this stuff. I can feel my mind thinking and working differently. And it was a passion that I wanted to explore, because I watched you and I watched your brother and be very successful in technology and online and internet. And I see the power and the speed of it. I was always one of those guys that I loved when CRMs came out. I bought my own before the company bought one, because I saw it was a tool that could make me better than my peers. I could just do more. I couldn't. You can't keep it all in a notebook like we used to. So yeah, it was awkward. It is, and I'm pushing through that piece because
my favorite part was you telling me that you had to keep putting the same shirt on so people couldn't tell that you had taken it in multiple different cuts.
Yeah, actually, by chance, I just
it's
grabbed
his recording shirt.
It's because it's right over here on the exercise bike. So I just grab it because it's always ready, because I have to do it in bits and pieces. I watch you and your brother do these big long recorded sessions, and I'm doing like 2 slides at a time, and I'm recording. So the content, it's just different world, but I love it, and I know that as time goes on, it's going to be people are going to have to adapt, and anybody that can find a way to you talked about Ross and giving everything up and going out in an RV, and I gave up a great job. I they didn't want me to go. We were super successful, and I had I've been there 30 years, and I broke out of that so I could challenge myself again, because it wasn't just about the money. It was more about where I am in life and what I want to do with my family, and a little more control of my life and my personal things that I want to do. But I'm also really enjoying the learning aspect of it, and so that's what I would say. It was awkward, and I'm learning from it, and that's fun. Awkward, you should be uncomfortable.
No, you look good. You got an SM7B. I see your Scarlett interface. You got the cloud lifter in the background.
Well, it's
almost like one of your sons told you everything to buy.
And he did. I would still be trying to speak into this computer over here and looking at the camera there, but you've helped me so much, and just professionalizing how I go about this world, because I do believe that, and you and your brother have both helped me in very different ways. You both have these just incredible strengths in different areas. You're super creative, and and professional. Ross is very instinctive. He's very instinctive in how he does his thing. So it's just fun. It's fun to watch both of you be hugely successful. And so, it's well, how would I say, encouraged me or inspired me to do what I've done. So I have to credit some of these big moves I've made to you two.
Well, Stone Cold Closing. And that is that's when is that going to go up? When are we going to be able to check that out?
Yeah, it'll be up in the next 2 weeks. I've got the first module. I've got the introduction done, and so I'm going to be recording over the next couple of weeks, module 2 and module 3, and it'll go out complete in 2 weeks. That's the goal for it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I think it has a ton to offer. I know it has a ton to offer. Salespeople and enterprises that are struggling with getting their sales force up to speed or their salespeople.
Yeah, and you wanted to keep going and re-recording it until it was perfect, and we're like, yeah, the content's great. Just push it out there. Just put it out there, and in each one you'll probably find new little tips and tricks with the production side of it. But the content is what really spoke to me. So excellent job with that. Thanks for popping on and talking about this with me and helping me get a little bit better idea and wrap my head around the sales force in 2021. What does that look like? So thanks, Dad.
A lot of fun. Thanks, Tyler. Take care.
All right.